Okay, I think we can slowly start. It's already 4:02. So welcome everyone to our first SCTA Next Gen webinar. We are actually very happy to conduct this first webinar of the year. And we have quite a big audience today, so we are really, really happy. Just before we start, we are recording this webinar, and it's going to be published on our website, on the LinkedIn page, and also on our YouTube channel. We also have two very interesting updates and very exciting news from the SCTA Next Gen before we kick off the webinar. So the first one is that we still have some available spots to our Hamburg coffee tour. We are approaching our Germany trip. It's going to be on the 22nd and the 23rd of May. We are really, really excited. So we hope people will still join. And Sarah from SCTA Next Gen, she just put the registration link in the chat, so you can easily access the registration link from there. The second very exciting news is that our SCTA Next Gen Sustainability Contest is now open. The deadline is the 2nd of June, so you still have 1 month time to subscribe and input your application. We really encourage you to apply if you have any innovative idea and you really want to make a change in the coffee industry. It's very exciting project, and you are really proud to have this project also this year. So all that said, we are really happy and honored to have Hanna Neuschwander today as a speaker. Hanna is the director. Hi, Hanna. She's the director of communication and strategy of the World Coffee Research. She's also the author of more than 50 magazine articles on coffee. And she also wrote a book titled Left Coast Roast, which is a guide of the coffee and roasters from San Francisco to Seattle. And we all know it's a pretty interesting scene, coffee scene in the US. So highly, highly recommended to have this guide on your pockets. Also very interesting to know about Hanna is that she's almost one of the founders, let's say, of the World Coffee Research. She's there since 10 years, almost together with the foundation of the institute of the organization. As you might know, the World Coffee Organization is a non-profit research center, and is conducting a lot of and developing projects around innovation and sustainability around coffee. So it's really impressive the work that the center is doing, and we are very, very happy to have Hanna today here. She will walk us through the projects and the programs that the research center is conducting. So I'll stop here and I'll hand over to you, Hanna. Also, just one last thing, we have the Q&A enabled, the option is enabled, so feel free to ask all the questions directly on the chat, and we will read the questions for Hanna to answer. So thank you again, and I'll hand over to you, Hanna.
Thank you so much. I am delighted to be here, and I do really encourage you to pop any questions that you have in the chat as we go along the way. If you're unclear on something, you need clarification, you just want more information, or you have bigger picture questions, I'm excited to leave a bunch of time at the end to have more of a conversation. I'm going to attempt to share my screen here. I think I did it. We're good. Okay. You can see my slide. Okay. Wonderful.
Yes,
yeah, I'm super excited to talk with you guys this morning a little bit about the work that World Coffee Research is doing on breeding. And one of the things that I like to say about why I have such an amazing job, I love my job, is that when a lot of the rest of the coffee sector is sometimes, understandably, feeling stressed or focused on the challenges in the sector, which is certainly something we think about a lot. The primary focus of our work is really on the future, and it's a very optimistic kind of work. It's really looking at what the possibilities are and the opportunities are for making coffee, not just, kind of continuing on the way it has, but actually a profitable enterprise for small farmers, and something that works to support the economic impact that coffee has around the world. So I'm hopefully going to bring a dose of sunshine into your day. I don't know what it's been like before now, but I'm excited to talk to you a little bit about how we think about the future of coffee and how breeding new coffee varieties plays into that. Really quick, I'm just going to say a couple words just about what World Coffee Research is. My guess is that some of you have heard of us, but maybe don't quite know what we are and what we do. So at its most basic level, we are a nonprofit research organization. We are a global organization, so we have member companies in 200 countries. We function a little bit like a trade association, except we are exclusively focused on agricultural research. So companies are members of our organization. They primarily fund the work. We also use our voice, a unified voice, as kind of a representative of the industry to advocate for increased funding for coffee research in general. And our overall purpose is really about securing diverse and sustainable supplies of quality coffee for today and for the future, which has always been our mission, but as the kind of impacts and urgency of the climate crisis have become more clear over the last decade, I think the challenge to it has also become more clear and more real. So this is the work. We are a future-oriented organization. We really are thinking 10, 15, 20 years ahead about what it is that we're going to need as a sector in order to sustain coffee farming. Let's see. As I mentioned, we are a membership organization, so we are composed of 200 companies in 29 countries. Some of them, you'll see some of the logos here will be very familiar to you, are large multinational coffee companies. Others are very, very small micro roasters or smaller importers or equipment manufacturers. So we really represent a wide kind of swath of the industry. Okay, so let's talk about coffee trees and coffee tree innovation. The framework for all of the work that we do is about helping farmers succeed and helping bring farmers more choices. We all know, I think, that climate change is putting more pressure on farmers. We are feeling it in our pocketbooks right now. If you're a buyer of coffee, I assume many of you are working in those roles. You know this very well. We are seeing historic high coffee prices over the last year. And unlike some kind of past ups and downs, which can be heavily influenced by the futures market and things that are a little bit more remote from the fundamentals, we know that this price environment is really deeply affected by supply shortages. So we also know that a big reason why we're seeing those severe supply shortages is because we have multiple overlapping negative climate events in the world's two largest producers. So we have concentrated supply. We have two big disruptions to that supply. It's affecting prices. And we don't expect that kind of thing to not happen again. In fact, we expect it to be happening more frequently in the future. And there's some pretty good climate modeling research now that is documenting that synchronous climate events are on the rise. So in that reality, there's a lot of things that you can do or that can be affected by this. But we focus on one very simple part of this equation, which is the coffee tree itself. Trees are one of the most important investments that farmers make, for sure, right? It is the basis of their production. And we also know that many farmers around the world don't have access to the trees that they need for the world that's changing around them. Historically, farmers may have access to only a small handful of varieties that have been developed by breeding programs that some of them are decades to even a century or more old. Kenya is a good example. They did a lot of breeding in the 1920s. We have some amazing, beautiful, wonderful Arabica coffee varieties as a result of that are highly susceptible to things like coffee leaf rust. And many farmers in many parts of the country are still growing those 100-year-old varieties. And they've been, solid and good workhorses for a long time, but they're not keeping up with reality. So farmers need more options and more choices. And we know that it matters what kind of tree you have. So this is a picture that we like to show a lot. On the left, you see trees that are almost entirely defoliated from a rust outbreak. And on the right, you see trees that are rust resistant. And you can imagine the obvious impact, economic impact that this has for a farmer if they have one of these trees versus the other. So this is a picture that was taken at a farm in Brazil in, I think, 2017. So we know that if you have the right tree, it not only enables farmers to withstand some of the pressures and challenges that they face every day, whether it's weather related, climate related, disease and pest related, or even just market related, right? The quality of coffee that the tree is capable of producing can affect what markets you're able to sell into. So we know that having the right tree matters a lot. And we also know that the historic amount of innovation that's happened for coffee and coffee varieties has been generally not enough. And I'll talk about that more in a second. We also know that trees really matter for climate change. So in addition to having, basic kind of biological features like tolerance to drought or tolerance to heat, these are all things that you can target in breeding programs. Actually, the most important thing that you can do is increase yield. When you increase yield for a farmer, you are able to effectively reduce your carbon emissions. So you're affecting not just the ability of a farm to adapt to climate change, you're also reducing its impact on worsening the effects of climate change, which is called mitigation. When you're able to produce more coffee with the same or fewer resources, that's in effect increasing productivity. And there's a lot of good research from across many, many crops that shows this is one of the most effective ways that you can help a farmer adapt to climate change. When a farmer has more production, they have more cash. When they have more cash, they're able to stabilize. They're able to be more resilient if a crisis comes to their farm in the form of a weather event. They're able to invest in their farm in ways that allow them to withstand future climate events. So it's a really important feature, and one that often we often kind of immediately skip to the more like biological features like resistance to certain disease or heat tolerance. But in fact, yield is one of the most important traits when we're talking about climate resilience. And as I mentioned before, this is especially urgent because we have this really big innovation gap in coffee. So this is just a small example to show that over the course of the same period of time, since about 1990, in apple farming, apple breeding, we've seen the introduction of over 5,000 new varieties of apples for farmers. In that same period of time, we've seen the introduction of 121 coffee varieties. Coffee is worth a lot more than apples in terms of the global economy, the effect that it has, the number of farmers that it supports economically around the world. So coffee is it's one of the biggest crops and most important, especially commodity crops in the world. But we've seen historic, very low levels of innovation. And there's lots and lots of reasons for that. The kind of classic, easy to sum up one is it's primarily consumed in rich countries and it's primarily grown in poor countries. And the disconnect between the two historically was very big, right? If you were a consumer of coffee, you didn't know a lot about where coffee came from or about the challenges that farmers were facing there. And you didn't have that kind of shared constituency to advocate for more research. There's many other reasons, but that's a big one. So this is, we know, agricultural researchers know, I'm not a researcher, but people in my world are well aware that, having the right tree or having the right plant and using the innovation process to develop them is just a really fundamental part of commercial agriculture. It's just part of what you need to do in order to sustain commercial production. And so we have some catching up to do in coffee, but I'm going to talk to you all about how we're working on that. So at WCR, this is our primary focus, is to create better coffee varieties and to do it faster because the timelines, the pressure from climate change is very urgent, but the timelines for traditional coffee breeding are very long. It typically would take, historically, about 20 to 30 years from the time you make a cross, like you create the first seed from your breeding program to the time when you're able to introduce it commercially for farmers. 30 years is too long in the context of a world where the climate is changing as fast as it is right now, and where farmers have other choices and other opportunities for what to do with their livelihoods. So we are working to create lots more varieties faster to help ensure that farmers have the tools that they need to be successful. And our focus in our breeding program is on, as I mentioned before, productivity, which is fundamental for climate resilience and for farm profitability. It's on quality in the cup, and it's also on reducing risk in the supply chain. So this is one reason why, as you'll see, we work in many, many countries. We're not only working in partnership with Brazil and Vietnam, we're working in partnership with over a dozen countries on our breeding programs. So how do you make a new variety and get it out into the world? This is the basic process. You start with breeding, you make crosses, you then take those crosses and you put them into trials in the field, small numbers of trees, so not a lot of replications, just, a couple of trees, but putting them in multiple environments to see how they do and to expose them to that environmental pressure. You select the ones that are performing the best and you move those into larger scale trials. So this might be like a couple hundred or a couple thousand of the same tree to make sure that they're really able to perform in a commercial environment. Once you have those selections made and you've got your winners, you have to go through a variety registration process. You can't just take a new tree and put it on a farm. Typically, countries are very interested and very clear in the rules about what varieties can be grown in their country and what varieties are going to be best for their farmers. So there is a whole regulatory process around that has to be engaged in. And then you have to scale it up. So you might have this really great tree, but now you've got to make millions of those same tree or hundreds of thousands of those same tree. And the systems for doing that, but also producing healthy trees, are very nascent in coffee. They're very new. In many places, they don't yet exist. So when you're having large scale replication, there's a whole set of challenges that have to be sort of worked through. And then you make them available to farmers through many different means. So that may be a farmer taking him or herself to the nursery to buy a new tree. It may be a large-scale national renovation program where the government is involved in distributing trees. And it could be many things sort of in between. So different systems in different countries, lots of complexity and diversity depending on where you are and what their kind of historical infrastructure is for this process. But that is the general way that it happens. Okay, so now that's the backstory. I'm going to talk a little bit about our breeding programs. So we have two primary programs, one focused on Arabica, one focused on Robusta. I'm going to talk to you primarily about our Arabica program today. The Robusta program is underway. It's getting off the ground this year. We have 7 countries that are now participating. It's going to be very similar in many ways to the Arabica program. So I'm just going to focus on the one that's a little bit further along, so because I have a more story that I can tell you, but just know that it's happening in parallel for Robusta as well in slightly different countries. So we are working not just ourselves as WCR to make these new varieties. We are working in partnership with many countries. So historically, countries are the breeders. They are the primary ones that have done this work in the past, creating new coffee varieties and getting them out for farmers. We are working together with them and their national coffee research institutes. So we are distributing to them many, many, many new genetics that they wouldn't have access to otherwise. And then every one of our partners is installing basically those same genetics in their fields across this huge global network. We're aggregating the data from all of the sites and all of the partners, and then using that and using modern genomics approaches to more efficiently select which are the best performers tailored for these different environments. Our partners then are able to make their own decisions from this collection of trees, of breeding materials that they're sent, which ones are going to perform best for farmers in their country, and to go through that variety registration and release process. So every country is getting this pool of large genetics, but each country will develop and release its own varieties from it. So there will be a lot of diversity in that system. The other thing that we're doing, and this is WCR doing it, not with our partners, is working on a speed breeding program. So we are trying to really, really, really shorten the time that it takes to go from making the crosses to releasing a variety. I said earlier, it can take 20 to 30 years. If you look at a variety, like a really well-known variety like Katura or Katwai, the time from when they were, that are still like really commonly planted in a lot of places, the time from when they were first created to when they were really widely adopted by farmers might be as much as 60 or 70 years. These incredibly long historic timelines, and we don't have the luxury of that much time. So we are working on these kind of cool processes to shorten the breeding timeline down to 8 years, which is still, it's not nothing, but it's a lot shorter than it was in the past. And if you look at the photo on the kind of bottom right, you'll see some of the setup of how we're doing this. We are really pushing the plants. These are the breeding materials to reproduce faster. So they're able to produce seed instead of in 3 years in a little more than a year. So part of the breeding process is that you have to do cycles. You select a tree, and then from that tree, you generate new seed. You plant that seed, it germinates and grows, and you do it again. And typically, because the coffee plant takes 3 years to produce seed, if you're going to do 7 cycles, 7 times 3 is 21. That's your breeding timeline. If you can shorten the reproduction timeline to a year, you can do that same amount of cycling in 7 years. So that's part of what we're doing to speed up the process. It doesn't mean that once those trees are commercially released for farmers that they will reproduce in 1 year. This is just what we're doing to push them for the breeding process. And we use like super careful nutrition and these screen houses. We like really control the environment to just push the reproductive cycle. So you can start to get a little flavor of kind of the global nature of this program, and maybe a little bit about the scale of it. I want to show you just quickly a video. It's 2 minutes that includes some of the breeders that are working around the world collaboratively in this project, and how they see it and what they're excited about.
Coffee is an incredible beverage that unites millions of people around the world. In order to sustain that, we need to make improvements in how coffee breeding is done.
I feel the most exciting element about the Innovate Network is bringing together countries around the world. It's addressing global coffee sector challenges in a collaborative way.
It's really new and different, and we see that with our partners, how exciting it is for them to come and join and be a part of this.
We're very grateful to be part of the global network of Innovea.
Innovea representa una gran oportunidad para fortalecer al sector cafetalero de México.
We can expand and we can strengthen the networking between coffee researchers in the world.
We're able to exchange knowledge and information that is useful in our breeding programs.
So we're all working together in a very coordinated way to evaluate the same genetic material in many different environments in many countries around the world.
For us, it's important to have new varieties in our system. These new genotypes could help us to face the changing environment.
By giving them the best varieties for their own local environment. It means they're able to produce productively, they can profit off the land, they can sell coffee and stay in business. We are globally oriented and we absolutely have a vested interest in seeing many diverse origins of supply to continue to succeed.
WCR scientist research team is incredible because it's now introducing new breeding technologies that hasn't been used in coffee.
Innovea is very, very essential to the coffee industry.
Oh boy. Now I have to figure out how to close this. See if it'll close itself. No. All right, technical difficulties. Sorry, guys.
If you try just to close it and reopen, maybe. I think it's
Okay, that's what I'm
okay,
gonna
and then you can reshare now.
That's what I'm gonna do. Here we go.
It happens.
Oh no, it went back to the same spot.
Coffee
Nope.
is an
Oh, you guys. How do I get out of here?
If you press escape, maybe it could help. Restart your
thank
laptop.
Okay, there I am. Thank you. You'd think after like, I don't know how many years of doing PowerPoint presentations. And
It's always like that.
Yep.
Hanna,
Okay.
actually, we already have some questions. Would you
Yeah.
like to finish the presentation and we go through the questions at the end? Or would you like to comment on some
Yeah,
questions?
I think so. I think that will be better just to make sure we like tell the story, but I will.
Okay.
I
Yeah,
only
let's
have
move
like
on
5
then.
minutes.
Okay.
Okay.
Sounds good.
I want to get it to as many questions as we can. Okay.
Yeah.
So hopefully that was, I don't know, I find it very inspiring to hear these coffee breeders talk. That video was shot at a workshop that we did in Amsterdam at the end of 2023. And it was incredible to see these scientists who, some of them had never left their countries. They had never been out of their country. They had never had the opportunity to interact in person with other coffee breeders. And I think that is really representative of how siloed some of the work around this has historically been, let alone, so they hadn't had opportunities to interact with each other, with people doing the same work as them, trying to solve the same problems that they were trying to solve around the world. They'd also never interacted with coffee companies. So to be able to then take them to a roastery and do a cupping with a sourcing team and a quality team and help them begin to learn some of the language of, what it is that matters to you all as you're making buying decisions, trying to build a breeding program that integrates all of those perspectives and points of view, so that it's able to take into account all its end users. Like farmers, right, matter a lot, and that's who breeders are used to working for, the farmers in their countries, but also you, because ultimately you are the buyers and the consumers of the raw material that they're producing, and you need certain things from it. So that was really exciting and inspiring. Made me feel like, this is really the right thing to be doing. And also just to see the kind of global nature of the program, that this is, and I'll give you an example of why it's so important. If you are, I showed you the pipeline before, like one of the first things you do is you create your new materials, your potential new varieties, and then you put them in the field and you see how they do in these environments. If you're running a breeding program in I'll just keep picking on Kenya because they're amazing. If you're running a breeding program in Kenya and you create some new materials that you're considering releasing and you're testing them, the only thing that you could do historically is put those trees in different parts of Kenya, which you are going to capture some good environmental variation if you go to Koru versus Ryuru versus, other growing regions, but you're still trapped in Kenya. Those trees are only going to get the benefit of exposure to the environments that exist within a fairly constrained geographical area. If you're putting your trees in Kenya, in Indonesia, in Uganda, in Hawaii, you are going to capture so much more environmental variation and pressure. You're going to learn so much more about what those genetics are capable of, and you're going to push the genetics to express all of their potential qualities, which is going to enable you to make more informed selections and potentially to find what's going to be successful in different environments in a much more efficient way than if you were just testing them in one place. So this is a big feature of our program that is completely unusual and new, to have this large of a network for testing, where also the data is being aggregated centrally. And it's really, really, really important for that climate resilience piece to be exposing the genetics to so much environmental variation. The other thing that's really exciting is just how many materials we're working with. So I'm going to tell you a quick story about the past. Many of you, if you have heard much about coffee varieties or know anything about it, you have probably heard of the Timor hybrid. This was a plant that was discovered on the island of Timor in the 1920s. It's a natural cross between Arabica and Robusta, and it is like sexually biologically an Arabica plant, but it has rust resistance that comes from its Robusta parent. And so in the 1950s, there was a rust research program in Portugal called CIFC. They took the Timor hybrid and they crossed it with Caturra and also with Via Sarchi. These were like traditional Arabica varieties that were dwarf, that were high production at the time, kind of important commercial Arabica plants at the time. They did this in order to create new rust-resistant varieties that could be deployed around the world, because in the 1950s, rust was in Asia. It had not yet arrived in the New World, but they were absolutely bracing for it to arrive in the New World. They knew it was going to come. And so they started this kind of limited term global breeding program to try to create rust-resistant materials that could be deployed to breeding programs around the world. The little picture on the left here is just to represent, if you think of the blue as being the Timor hybrid, the orange as being Caturra, and the red as being Via Sarchi, you can see that they basically made two families. And you might have heard these families called Catimor and Sarchimor. From those two families that were created by this program in the 1950s, the children, the offspring of this breeding program, were sent to breeding programs around the world. And from those two families, we now have over 50 commercial coffee varieties that make up about 95% of the rust-resistant coffee production in the world. So if you buy coffee from Latin America, a lot of the basis of the production and the security of that production comes from this breeding program 60 years ago. It has helped sustain coffee production in the face of rust pressure. Now that rust has arrived in the New World, which it did in the 70s, if we hadn't had this breeding program, you probably wouldn't be buying Arabica coffee from Latin America. So it has been foundational for supporting the success of production in the face of rust. And from these two families, we have a tremendous amount of commercial varieties that have been developed. This on the left is what we're doing in Innovea. So all of the dark ones at the bottom are basically the same as those two that I showed you. We're going to have 17 parents that are crossed into 29 families. The little graphic that I'm showing you kind of on the bottom right is just a kind of hypothetical illustration of how much genetic variation that represents. So when we say, as we do, that we're going to release 100 new varieties by 2030 into commercial testing, and sometimes we do get people being like how? This is how. So from 2 families to 50 commercial varieties that are sustaining production in Latin America today, we have this incredible amount of diversity that's being brought to bear into this program that is going out into countries around the world. So it's global. It is using this incredible reservoir of genetics that haven't been brought together before, including a lot of elite genetics, meaning like we're using varieties that are well known and well established and they have high commercial potential, but we're also bringing in new diversity to try to, for example, get new kinds of rust resistance. So like the scale of it is very, very big and different. This is just a kind of graphic representation of what you saw in the video, which is just the global nature of it. We are working with 9 countries in the Innovea program are participating. The trees are going out to research sites in all these countries. The data is coming back to a central location. And in all these countries, the trees are being exposed to a lot of environmental variation, which is really critical. And then I talked to you just briefly about the breeding timelines, but I just wanted to show you in graphic form how exciting this is, that we can take a process that has typically taken 20 to 40 years, and we can shorten it to 8 years. And that is using a combination of, as I mentioned, like just fertigation and like really carefully controlling the environment, and also modern genomics approaches, which help us use lots of data and statistical analysis to make better predictions about which plants are the right ones to keep and select, rather than having to wait 5-6 years to see them in the field and with our eyes decide which ones are going to be the best ones. We still have to validate their performance in field tests, but we can use genetics and statistics to work with larger numbers of trees and make predictions that allow us to kind of move faster. So this is on many levels just super exciting, because it is a scale that we haven't seen before, using an amount of diversity we haven't brought together before, moving at speeds that we have also not been able to achieve before. I mentioned Robusta, just a super quick preview that we are doing the same thing in Robusta. We're launching that program this year. Right now we have partners on board in Vietnam, Uganda, India, Ghana, and Rwanda that together make up about 83% of Robusta exports around the world. So we are super excited about that. And the biology of Robusta is a little bit different, so the timelines are a little bit different, but we're really excited to be running that program in parallel. And then last but not least, I just wanted to say one thing about and then what? So, right, you can create the best variety in the world, or the best varieties in the world. And I like to emphasize that, because there is not a silver bullet. There's not one variety that's going to be best for all farmers in all places. It's really about creating choices for farmers. But it does not matter if you have made a whole bunch of the best varieties in the world if farmers can't get them. And the traditional way that happens is just like any market, right? You guys buy coffee, your companies turn it into products, or you sell it to other companies that turn it into products. Those products have to find their way into consumers' hands through the market. The same thing is true of trees, right? They somehow, farmers have to get new trees. In informal seed systems, that is usually a pretty simple process. It's usually a farmer looking at a tree and saying, that one looks good, I'm going to save the seed, I'm going to plant it in the ground. In formal seed systems, you need market structures to reproduce those trees at scale, to have quality control, to make sure that the trees are the right ones, and that they are healthy, that they have good roots, that they are not diseased, et cetera. And in many places around the world, and we have done a lot of genetic testing in seedlots and in nurseries, we have done a lot of work in training seedlots and nurseries. We are very confident in saying that in most places in the world, we do not have functional formal seed systems for coffee. There are not at scale current systems that can support the deployment of a huge amount of new innovation. So in parallel to doing the work on breeding, we also have to be doing work to help build these systems and make sure, and incentivize the building of these systems and make sure that they are ready for the flood of innovation that's coming, which is no small task. So this is just a summary of basically what I just said, that the seed supply chain part of the system for moving new varieties into farmers' hands is not where we need it to be, and that is something that we need to focus on, and we are advocating for more investment into those systems, and working with our partners in countries that are participating to help also try to shore up those systems and make sure that they're ready for what's coming. Yeah, so I'll just kind of summarize by saying we feel very excited actually about the future. We feel like the problems that we're facing with coffee are many, they are complex, but they are problems that innovation can help us address. That's the nature of innovation. It's very exciting. And the things that, that we think are most exciting about this work it really is those partnerships and the global nature of the program. The fact that we have all of these countries now working together and collaborating. We also have all of these companies, these coffee companies, who are competitors in the marketplace, but making this collaborative investment to shore up supply and make sure that they have the resources that they need to do their business. And connecting the dots between these two things, right? Making sure that coffee breeders have access to you all to be able to understand what it is that you're looking for in your materials, and same thing with farmers. So it's super exciting work. We feel really jazzed about it. We get excited when we talk about it. And it does give us some optimism for what's ahead for coffee and for coffee farmers. So with that, I want to leave plenty of time for questions. If you're interested in kind of following along and learning more, you can scan the QR code. We send out a newsletter every month. We have a really active presence on social media. Encourage you to follow us on LinkedIn and Facebook and X and whatever your platform of choice is. And I will stop talking now so that I can do more talking.
Thank you so much, Hanna. Really, really interesting. And thank you for making it easy as well for many people that maybe are not researchers. So really, thank you. It was pretty interesting. And I look forward to try in 2030 the new varieties of coffee. So we have a few questions. Oh, let me read. So the first one, lovely presentation. Thank you very much for this and the work done. What is the most effective approach to encourage and inform farmers to invest in new varieties? I think you almost covered this a little bit, but if you want to remark something, you can.
It is such a good question. And I think part of the challenge is that depending on the country, how farmers get varieties and find out about varieties can be very different. So in countries like Colombia or Uganda, you have a very centralized system for this. You have very tightly regulated control over varieties and nurseries. And I'll use Colombia as an example because they're in many ways the most successful at this. But Colombia in the early aughts did a major national renovation program. Some of you have probably heard about Castillo, the Castillo variety, but they had a breeding program. They knew that they needed to create new varieties that would be more strong against rust, because they could see that rust was mutating and that the old varieties weren't going to be able to withstand it. So they created these new varieties. They actually did a lot of quality testing to make sure that they would meet the Colombian spec that buyers expected. And then they deployed them at scale. So they pushed out 3 trillion trees over the course of about 4 years. And they had incentives for farmers to plant those new trees, and they sent an army of extension agents to train the farmers and to give them fertilizer. So that's one model, and it's a very effective model. They replaced 3 trillion trees in 4 years. Not every coffee country is as organized as Colombia. Not everyone in Colombia likes how centralized and organized that system is. Everywhere has their ups and downs. So that's one model. But if you're looking at a country like, I don't know, El Salvador or Costa Rica, Kenya is probably a little more similar. It's more of a kind of liberalized market system where it's more farmers making choices about when they want to replant and what they're gonna grow. And in that kind of system, having access to nurseries is really important. So they need to be able to actually go see the plants, talk to someone, learn about what the varieties are. It really helps to have a demonstration plot so that they can see with their own eyes what the variety looks like. Sometimes it might be like in Peru, for example, you have really strong co-op structure. So you might have a co-op that has a demonstration plot, but they also operate a nursery. That's a very effective system for helping farmers evaluate risk, because they can really look and see the plants and go like, okay, yeah, I'm convinced that looks good. It's not just word of mouth. In Kenya, you might have a system more where you have like a lead farmer that's a kind of influential member of the community, and that farmer is willing to test something new and then kind of showcase it for their neighbors. So different models in different places, but generally, by and large, because there's so much risk involved in farming, all farming everywhere, you're at the mercy of the weather, you're at the mercy of the market. To put in a new plant is a big deal, like especially if you're taking out an old one to replace it, because you're losing the production of that old one. So finding ways to help farmers believe that this is like gonna work for them and have that security matters. So just telling them often is not enough. It needs to be supported by seeing, and it needs to be supported by other forms of kind of trust building in order to help them feel comfortable taking on the risk that they're taking on, and just acknowledging that it is a risk for them, for sure.
It is, yeah. Wow, interesting. Then we have the second question here. Are there varieties out there that are withstanding frost? Like this is very specific to frost, if there is any breeding or any variety that can defeat that.
Yeah, it's a good in frost hits. It can kill a plant overnight. So it can be very deadly for a kind of coffee belt. In the equatorial closer regions, it's a little less common. And actually, for that reason, Brazil historically has the strongest breeding programs in the world. Most of the commercial coffee varieties that are grown around the world come out of Brazilian breeding programs. They've just spilled over borders over the years. But Brazil, because it has so much production in more southerly latitudes, it has done a lot of breeding for frost. So actually there are some great frost tolerant varieties that have come out of Brazilian breeding programs. I want to say IPR 107 is one of them. I think IPR 103. You can do some research online, so like Google Scholar searches. One of the terms, coffee, Coffea arabica, frost tolerance. And if you search for the names of any of the Brazilian breeding institutions, which would be like IAC, EPAMIG, IAPAR, these are all like regional kind of institutions that support different coffee states. You'll come up with some good lists. The other one that we had tolerance from is F1 hybrid varieties in general as a kind of category. And we think that's primarily just because they have good overall vigor. They're just really vigorous plants. And we had a trial that was a global trial, so same varieties in many, many countries around the world. And there was a pretty extreme frost that hit the site in Laos. And we saw that the Brazilian varieties and the hybrids survived and everything else died. So there are varieties out there that are withstanding frost.
There are efforts doing. Well, interesting. Let's hope we won't have any other frost, but sorry, Hanna, were you saying something?
Nope.
No. Okay, so let's go to the next one. Are you working on seed propagated hybrids?
That's a good question. That's a really good question. And that is a very technical question. So I'm going to try to unpack it as simply as I can. So by and large, there's two ways to mass produce a coffee variety. The primary way, for Arabica, the primary way is by seed, right? So if you want to grow a new baby coffee tree, you collect a cherry. Inside that cherry is the seed. Instead of, milling and roasting it, what you do is you put it in the ground, you let it germinate, and you grow it into a new tree. So if you're a seed producer, you might actually have a whole coffee farm, but instead of selling your plants to roasters, selling your seed to roasters, you're using it to sell to farmers. And that is the traditional way. It's the cheapest way to mass produce coffee. It's the way most farmers are used to. You can also clonally propagate coffee. So you can take cuttings, or you can use a biotechnology process called somatic embryogenesis to make a clone. So this is like an exact genetic replica of the mother plant that you make little baby plants from. If you are working with F1 hybrid varieties, you have no choice but historically, you have no choice but to clone them to either use cuttings or somatic embryogenesis to mass produce them. The seed from an F1 hybrid will not be the same as its parents. It is a mix of the genetics of the two parents, which makes sense, and it is not stabilized. So it will not perform the same as the mother and father. It will be some sort of mix. So historically, if you're going to get a hybrid variety out to farmers, you have to do cuttings, which is one reason why hybrids are more expensive. There is, however, a possibility of creating seed propagated hybrids if one of the parents is sterile. And I won't even go into the full explanation of that, but it is possible. There are a couple of breeding experiments, mostly run through CIRAD and ECOM, to try to create seed propagatable hybrids using a male sterile parent. It is interesting and exciting because you can more efficiently produce hybrids to get them out to farmers. Farmers still can't save the seed. It's still hybrid seed. The seed of the seed will not be reproduced true. The only problem or challenge with that right now is that we only really know of one plant that's male sterile. So you are limited in the genetics that you can use. You can use whatever mom you want, but the dad has to be just this one tree. So in an elite breeding program, what you ideally want to be doing is using like elite genetics. The dad is super high performing and has certain qualities, and the mom is super high performing and has certain qualities, and you're crossing them and getting the result that's a mix of those. And in this current environment, when we only have this one kind of tree, you're kind of just stuck with one parent being that one parent. So it is exciting, it's promising, but it's limited, and we're not actively working on it right now, but there are breeding programs that are actively working on it, which is great. But it's just, the context is,
okay, so there is actually a project developing this concept.
There is, yeah.
It's interesting.
And at some point it may be possible to take that trait of male sterility and through breeding achieve it in any parent plant, so that you could really work with whatever material you want in your breeding program and make it male sterile, and that would be really exciting. We're not there yet.
So we will wait for the results as well. It's Then we have a question from Julius. Thank you, Julius. Where can companies get information or advice on which new varieties to use and access to them? Examples for sustainability projects.
That's such a good question. So as I mentioned, typically what varieties are available in a given country it's limited. It's limited by what is kind of officially released in that country. Or you have some countries like Peru where there is no official system and it's just the Wild West. There's who knows what's out there and what nurseries are producing. So it is a combination, I think, of consulting with the local national technical board, whatever that is, the National Coffee Research Institute, to know, what is officially recommended in the country. Typically countries will know like who operates the seed supply for that, so that you can ensure that you're actually getting the correct genetics, which does really matter if you are, for example, wanting to deploy a rust-resistant variety. You want to make sure that the nursery that you're getting plants from is actually producing rust-resistant materials. And we have a lot of experience and evidence in some of these systems knowing that they don't have what they think they have, which can be the result of lots of different things. It's not intentional, but it can be a real problem. So it's looking kind of at official sources. Depending on the country, it may be, you may have access to more things. It can be going to the breeder. So, we have our coffee catalog summarizes a lot of different characteristics of different varieties that are available around the world. And if there's one that looks interesting, it has the right mix of qualities you're looking for, you can go try to consult with the breeder to find out where good healthy seed supply is. If you happen to be looking at a project in a Latin American country, we do have on our website a list of nurseries and seed suppliers that have been, where we've done genetic testing and verified that they have good practices and good traceability processes in 5 countries supported by the MOCA program. So sometimes it's like a lot of calling around. There are not necessarily good centralized systems for information about this. It can be very challenging. But questions that you want to be asking are like, what are the biggest challenges that farmers are facing? If rust is present, ideally you want a rust resistant variety. If coffee wilt disease is present, ideally you want a wilt disease resistant variety. And then what other qualities might matter? Are they selling into a specialty market, or are they selling into a commercial market? Because your variety choice might differ. And then really looking at what nurseries are out there and their production practices, and if they're going to produce good, healthy varieties. So there's a lot. We are coming out with a web tool at the end of this year that will have more robust information on 31 commercial varieties that are included in our big global variety trial, that overlays variety performance information with climate modeling data. So we can see if you're in a particular climate that's maybe similar to a climate that one of these trial sites is in, we can use some climate modeling data to show which varieties are performing better in terms of yield and rust as a tool for selecting. So that'll be coming in December. And that tool will be called Café Clima. So sorry, that's
Hanna,
kind of a vague
can you repeat the name of the tool? I think you just
Café Clima.
Café Clima. Okay. And this will be available directly on your website, right?
Yep. And that's also where our variety catalog is available. It's linked at the very top. You can see it immediately. So just to get some basic information about variety performance, you can get that in our catalog.
Okay, we have still 3 questions. Yeah, we have time. Yeah. So Gary, thank you, Gary, is asking, we can see you are active in important producing countries. How do you support breeding program in smaller producing countries where they have no access to good breedings?
That's a great question. The countries that are participating in our Innovea network all have breeding programs. Not every coffee producing country has a breeding program. They may not have the resources to support that. So one of the things that we are thinking about is through our own breeding program. So we're also doing variety selection and eventually release. It may be possible for countries that don't operate their own breeding programs to, kind of look through the variety choices that we are creating and find stuff that might work for them. That is a possibility. We're still like a couple of years away from that, so I don't know how that might play out, but we've certainly had conversations about that possibility. Historically, the way that new varieties have showed up in countries that don't have their own breeding programs is through what we call spillover, that a neighboring country has a breeding program and develops varieties, and they just kind of end up over the border, either through formal agreements, which has happened, or through informal processes. And it has worked. It does end up, if you look in East Africa, for example, I mentioned the Kenyan breeding program from the 1920s, that program created varieties you might have heard of, like SL28, SL14. A lot of neighboring countries around Kenya are growing those varieties through this sort of spillover process. A lot of Latin American countries are growing varieties that were developed in Brazil through the spillover process. So a more recent informal example is a variety called Obata. It was created in Brazil. It's resistant to rust. It's high yielding. Brazil licensed it to Costa Rica in 2014. So it was released in Costa Rica about 10 years after it was released in Brazil, maybe 15 years. And that was through a formal process. So Costa Rica didn't have to create it. They didn't have to breed it, but they were able to get access to it for their farmers. So there are many ways that that can happen. And as that whole part of the coffee sector that I talked about, the missing middle, the seed sector, as that continues to grow and evolve, more options will exist. It's all just been so informal historically in coffee that there haven't been good pathways for that kind of thing, for countries to get access to varieties they didn't create. More and more, I think there will be opportunities for countries to work together to get access to varieties that will work for their farmers.
Okay, yeah, next question was actually related to Costa Rica, but you just mentioned that they are applying this spillover concept. But the question is genetic variety verification available in Costa Rica that you know of? So it's just a spillover that they are
Mhm.
using, or they actually have some program implemented?
Yeah, I think what they're talking, so Costa Rica does have its own breeding program. Their National Coffee Research Institute is called ICAFE, ICAFE. I think what the question is about is more about like DNA fingerprinting. Like, are there labs or
Genetic
nurseries that are
variety
able
verification.
So to say like, is this really Obata? Can I test it and confirm that it is Obata? I actually don't know the answer to that. I do know that there is a variety verification service run by a lab in Switzerland called Intratec. And they have a database of, I think, about 30 Arabica varieties, most of which are Central American, Latin American varieties. So and anybody, that's a commercial service, anybody can use it. So if you had a nursery that you were working with on a renovation program and you wanted to check and make sure that that nursery was had the correct genetics, they can take samples and send them to this lab in Switzerland called Intratec. And if you are interested in more information about that, you can email me and I will connect you with the right people at Intratec. There's not a lot of like local services available for this in most places that I'm aware of. But there may be, I also have colleagues that I can ask that are like more local in Costa Rica. I'm not 100% sure.
Okay. So Paul, if you're
But you can
still
email me.
here, you can get in contact, directly with Hanna, and she will give you more details on that. Hanna, sorry, one very last question. This is from Aris. Do you have breeding program to? Oh, we have another one. No. Do you have breeding program to nematode resistance? I hope I read it well.
That's correct. That's a great question. Nematodes are like these little worms that affect the roots of coffee plants, and they can be really devastating. So some places have nematodes in the soil, some places don't. There are breeding programs around the world that have specifically focused on rootstock, on developing coffee that's just used for the roots part. So you do grafting. You take the top of a, let's say, Caturra plant or geisha or whatever it is, and you graft it onto roots of different coffee variety that has resistant root systems. And there are breeding programs that focus just on the root systems. We don't have that right now. It is very likely that in the future we will, but there are good rootstocks that have been developed for that. They're primarily Robusta rootstocks, but you can graft an Arabica plant onto Robusta rootstock. So you can often find in nurseries in Costa Rica, for example, I know they do this, where you can buy a plant in a nursery that's grafted onto nematode resistant rootstock. And hopefully there will be more options for that as time goes on. Okay, and then I see there's one last question about how can people join the cultivar testing program, like actually be part of the breeding network. Right now in our Innovea network, it's a closed system. So we invited participants. We have 9 countries that signed up to participate. So for the next I think it's 6 years, the first cycle. It might be 3. I can confirm that for you. But for a certain defined period of time, this is the network. We will do a new cycle and we will open the cycle to more participants. And then I think there will be conversations about more people joining the program at that time. So I encourage you to stay in touch with us. Right now, our focus is exclusively working with national breeding programs, so countries that are working to support farmers, not with other commercial breeding programs. I have no idea if that will change in the future, but it certainly could. So I would say just stay in touch with us. In the moment, there's not an opportunity to join, but there very well may be as we move into our next cycle of breeding.
Okay, Hanna.
Is that it? I think that might be it.
Yes, we would. I also had some questions, but I think we can reconnect in another session because we are already over time, which is a very good sign. We are happy about that. But thank you again for your really refreshing perspective on this new agriculture chapter in coffee. We will follow closely all your projects and updates that you might add on the website. And hopefully we see you around in the fairs, in the conferences, and maybe in Portland again. So thank you,
Yeah.
everyone. Just a reminder,
you so
this is going to be recorded as well. Yeah.
It was great to be with you, and you asked wonderful questions, all of you. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye. Have a nice day, everyone.